Videotaping ourselves.
Okay. Right. We can talk about the community asset stuff first.
We need to know names.
Oh, right. I'm Sadie and I'm E.
I'm Elizabeth and I'm C.
Megan and I'm B.
Austin and I'm D. Callie and I'm A.
I think the prompt was about how are the needs of the community, how do those drive the assets? Is what the prompt was about.
Yeah, it's like how, like a brief description on how your community assets map is informed by the needs of the community.
Yeah.
And then also tying it in with the precious knowledge.
One of the needs I thought, when I first started thinking about needs, I started thinking about like organizations. But then the more I thought about it and remembered something we had read before, I started thinking about some of those smaller things, like a person who is a stay-at-home mom and might watch a whole bunch of people's children while they're at work, and how that is an asset that's not an organization, but it's driven by the need of the community.
I think that's important too with just parents helping out other parents too in that community. I think that's important because parents obviously have a lot going on, and so you can help each other out when you can.
It kind of goes along with like the gifts of the individual, like, you know, like that mom like has a gift of like working with the kids and she's like available to watch them, so might as well take advantage.
And I didn't type this up because I wasn't sure how to say it, but I was thinking how sometimes there's kind of this idea that if a culture is more like the women stay at home and raise the children and do the cooking and the household work and all of that, and the men are the ones who go to work, that sometimes Americans think of that as like an oppressive, like it's oppressive to women, like they don't have an opportunity. And really that sometimes I think it's just their culture and it's their asset in a way. The women are doing all of these things at home that need to be done, and the men are working, and for them it's not oppressive. It's just how the culture operates.
But a lot of times Americans assume that like the woman hates that she's stuck at home and wants to have a career.
Yeah.
But if that's how they were raised, like there's nothing wrong with that. You know?
No.
And I also liked what Austin, I think it was you, who wrote something about like we're all at different ages, so we have like different perspectives to bring, like which I hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah, I read that too. I like how you said that. It's true. Yeah. And that's all, and that kind of can connect to a community because everybody can offer something different.
And different experiences.
all of that.
Something in Precious Knowledge that like stood out to me was they talked about like planting the seed so it will grow. So I was kind of thinking like in the community, like the organizations like are places where like people can go and have that seed planted so that they can like grow, which I thought was kind of like an interesting tie between the two.
One thing we talked about this summer was developing some sort of community type thing through the school, like an after school event or something, and then talking about that it really needs to be sustainable, which is kind of like that seed being planted. So you can like come up with this great event, but if it only happens that year, then it's not really adding anything to the community, and you have to really try to find a way to make it sustainable. And to do that, you really need the community involved.
Support.
And part of like the planning process and all of that.
Yeah.
Just say, here's this event that we did, we think you're gonna love it, come to it,
Yeah.
and not involve the community at all. I had to read all about him years ago, and
I was
forgotten.
seriously, we had this reading in a different class, like not the exact same reading, but in the chapter of our book, we were also reading about Vygotsky, the exact same thing. I was like, well, I'm not reading this chapter because I already read this for you in class.
Well, and it's amazing to go and like read it again all these years later and realize how like true what he's talking about is, and it's just from so long ago.
Yeah.
Because that's really our goal. I mean, especially in Bellingham, we talk a lot about the whole child and how do you bring all of it together. It's not just sit in your seat and I tell you everything that you need to know.
like especially like we're in like a science education class, and so it's like all like interaction, and like I feel like I retain a lot more that way compared to like my lecture class. I'm like, okay, I need to like sit down with someone and talk about it. So that interaction definitely is something like I've seen to be helpful.
And that, our class, it's like more student based. So it's like you learn from others, you still learn from the teacher obviously, but she kind of lets us talk with our group members and kind of come up with our own ideas, and then we come together as like a whole class, and she kind of like overviews that. So yeah, it's a cool way of learning.
They used to have, Pinky Nelson. Do you know who he is? He works here. Oh, he's awesome. He's a science professor, but he like runs SMATE, and he used to be an astronaut.
He came into our class.
He's really kind of awkward, but he's
yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't really teach classes. He's more of just a higher up. Yeah. But he had a big grant for a while through INCOS, which is like a science thing, and we would, as adult teachers, come to Western and learn science. And it was kind of like what you're saying right now, where it was more on an adult level, so the science was something that like maybe we didn't have a very good understanding of, and then the activities were really hands-on and same kind of thing, talk about it, and it was so cool to see how as an adult that was a way better way of learning.
Yeah.
And then, to go back and apply that in your classroom. It was really a powerful way to, instead of just telling you this is how you should teach your students, you're experiencing it yourself.
Yeah. And like how you can like experience, like if you're not understanding it, like like now, okay, when your students are going through it, like these are some frustrations or like things that they might be thinking.
And it also goes along with the more capable learner, like what's it called? The
More knowledgeable other.
Yeah.
What is that called?
The zone of proximal.
Yeah, I think that's in like student-based classrooms when you're working in groups and pairs. That's obviously evident that that's helpful.
That's a huge buzzword, so don't forget that word, that whole phrase. We'll forever be hearing and talking about the zone of proximal control. And differentiation. It's like the same thing.
So much differentiation.
Yes. Depending on how many students you have in your classroom.
But just talk about it.
Oh, you talk about it. Yeah.
Alright, it's like my first quarter. It's like, so every single class. Today I've talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, that's what's best as a teacher, but then implementing it is what's hard.
Yeah.
One thing I was writing about is because obviously I'm going to be a high school math teacher, so it's like super important in math because you have students who are going to get the material really easily, and you have students who are not. So like having them, when I was in high school, our math classes were usually like your desks were like in rows, but it was like pairs were in rows. So you had somebody, the teacher would pair people with like somebody who's really good at math and somebody who wasn't very good at math. So you worked with them in class, and it was like, being good at math, you get to teach it to this other student who's not good at math, so you understand it deeper. It's like, it goes with differentiation. Like you're getting a deeper knowledge of what you're doing, and this student is getting help, and like by ZPD, it's like being brought up also. So it's like it works on both ends. It's not just the zone of proximal development like helps the student who doesn't understand by bringing them up, but it also helps the student who is really knowledgeable at this content to grow deeper in their knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's worked into it that it's differentiation just in having students work together.
Because like you never know, like one way to explain it might not make sense. So you have to like think of what kind of questions might they have. My only question with that is like, how do you make sure the students that are like on the lower end like don't feel like put down? Because I know in my pre-calculus class my teacher did that, but she told the class what she did. She's like, so I put you in pairs, like one of you's good and one of you's not good. And like she said, like one of you's not good at math, and so like that like totally put my partner down. Like, and so like I feel like you have to like not be like say it.
And it's something that you get better at. I feel like as a teacher, you kind of learn how to like because you might try to say something
Yeah.
like that and you'll watch the reaction and like, oh, I shouldn't have said it like that, like I'm gonna try to change how I say it. But yeah, if you don't ever address the fact that we're all different learners, at some point, like kids need to be aware of that. And so many teachers are so afraid of just saying, no, we're all in a different spot and it's okay and we're all learning. They just kind of are like, no, you're all doing wonderful.
Because then if you're not, then you feel like,
because you know you're not.
Yeah.
You know you're not
you
good at
obviously-
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Like there's people learn in different ways. Like you know, you could be better at language. You could be better at like math or science.
I think like one way my teacher did it was never like you're good at math, you're bad at math, so like you were a pair. But it was more of like, you're like she would explain it in like you're getting a glimpse into like how somebody else learns math.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so
So,
that's
like,
a really good way to look at it.
So like, and it was based on like section. So like after every test, you would like switch partners and stuff. So it's like, so they thought of this section this way, they thought of it this way. Like now I'm going to put you together because you have different thinking strategies, so you can learn off from each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know that it was never necessarily like you're good at math, you're bad at math, but it was like you by working with other students are not only either understanding math more or like being brought up, but like you're learning different strategies to do math.
Yeah.
I like the learning strategies because like everyone can like broaden like the way they think about it.
Yeah, the only time I really come in contact with it was in a math class, and she did that thing, and it was pretty apparent, like that's how she was doing it. No one was
Yeah.
offended, but like there was one subject it wasn't my strong skill, and she put me with someone who like just knows it and could not explain it, and so she 100% relied that the people who knew it would be able to teach the people that didn't. And so a lot of times I'd go into class and be like, he doesn't know how to teach me, like I don't know, and so she just didn't understand that sometimes since there is different learning, ways of learning, that sometimes,
And I think one thing
You
that's
can't rely on
important in like
students.
doing that like partner math or partner classes or like even like a group is that you don't get to stop teaching.
Exactly.
Like you can't rely on this other
Yeah.
student to do the teaching
Yeah.
for you. Like yes, they're working together, but you give your lesson and then they work on homework. And it was always like, I don't know, in our whole like school district, there's this huge like ask 3 before me. Like, So it was like, okay, you have your partner, and then there's the partners in front of you. You can ask a question, and then there's the partners behind you. So you had to like ask everybody around you before you could like go to the teacher.
Yeah.
Because then it's like everybody is thinking, and the teacher's not just like giving you answers and doing it.
Well, and then what you were just saying, Austin, is like what people talk about with their highly capable students, because the parent, often it's like, well, you're the highly capable student, so you already know how to do this, so you're going to teach this student how.
Exactly.
And often they can't, or it's, because if that's all you ever do, then they're not meeting their zone of proximal development either, and they're not going to grow at all
Exactly.
in the course of a year. So there's kind of a fine line between how much do you make them be the teacher and how much is it just we're trying to like learn from each other.
Yeah.
And there's some statistic, I forget what it is. One of my colleagues has a poster in her room because she doesn't have desks, so they all kind of mix around at tables in fifth grade.
I was
like,
what does that mean?
She has tables. They don't have like their own little space.
Yeah.
And so this poster is like how she kind of sells it at the beginning of the year. And I forget the whole thing, but the last one is 90%. You retain 90% of what you can teach to others.
Yeah.
So it starts out at like 75% of what you hear and what you do, but then if you can teach it, you
It's
really
something about
retain it.
if you like read something and then if you read it and hear it,
Yeah.
you read it and hear it and do it, and then like you can teach it.
Yeah. So even though we don't want them to be teachers because they're higher, they still need to be able. I had a student last year with the same thing as your partner. Like he could whip out math answers like that, but if you asked him to explain what he was doing, he had no idea.
Yeah.
He just knew the formula, to get the answer correct.
And younger kids too, I feel like it's harder for them to be able to like teach it to someone else. But I mean, it helps when you are able to get to that point because then you're able to understand the perspectives of other people and how like they might be struggling with something. And it's a lot of aspects.
I felt like I learned that a lot in 6th grade. Like my teacher never taught math. He would like give me the book and ask me to teach the whole class. And like as a 6th grader, I was just like up in the ICS cart, like and I was like very like, wait, what? And so
Well,
like,
then you
I-
probably didn't learn much.
I
that
didn't
year.
learn any, like, all we did, like, we came to school and we did math until lunch. And so
Oh my
like,
gosh.
yeah. And then like
I
went
love
to
math,
recess
but
and then like came back and like did reading and science and like that was so like I learned like nothing in math that year because I was just like always teaching it like so it was like something I already knew
Yeah.
and so I was just like
Is there anything else?
it was really odd.
Yeah. It's interesting way of teaching.
I'm taking the science education class, and I mean, I can totally see how she's doing this in our class, which I like because, we're all trying to be teachers, and so it's really nice. We work, do whatever is in our workbook, and then we talk in a group, and then we write down whatever she asks us on a whiteboard, and then we come as a group. There's probably 6 whiteboards, and we figure out an answer, and then we come to her, and we're so proud of ourselves. We finally get it all figured out, and then she ruins it. The whole plan is going perfectly, and then she ruins it and makes it 10 times more complicated, but then doesn't let us go back through and go through the process again. She just leaves us, so we're all confused. But it sucks because we had that moment of knowing everything, and we're really confident, and then it's really frustrating to be in that class. But I see how it works. It just
You need the second part.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Okay, go
like,
back and
include-
revise it.
she
now.
gives us new information, but then doesn't let us process it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, hey, you're missing a few steps there, lady.
My my question for this one at first was hard to answer, but then when I started thinking about it, so it was kind of asking how are all of these things related? So the education system, what Vygotsky says about learning, documentation status. That was pretty much it.
Language.
And language, and language in schools. And so I was thinking about how if you are not being taught the way that Vygotsky says that you should be taught, then your home language might not be developed, and then your English is not getting developed because you're never speaking to anybody. If you're in a classroom where you just kind of sit and get the information told to you. And then, so you're not developing those skills, and then you're worried about your parents getting deported or whatever, and you don't have the communication, so that might make you more nervous that you're going to get caught because you can't speak very well in English. So it was just it was hard for me to think about that, but after a while I was like, yeah, so these things are kind of just all connected and related back to Vygotsky. And really, if you're teaching the way that Vygotsky's theory says, then hopefully that wouldn't happen. The students feel like they're just kind of continuing to be oppressed. It's kind of a tricky question.
Yeah,
Think about.
Yeah, also have to go back to the last post we had, or 2 posts ago, and we were talking about the citizenship and stuff too.
Yeah. And how does that affect? How does their language learning affect their citizenship status?
And I was also kind of thinking with yours about the social interactions that they might have and what those would look like. So how would their progression be compared to someone like us who are in social interactions, talking all the time, if they're at home and they might speak their home language, but then they don't use that at school. So there's that comparison.
Yeah, and if you're not being allowed to socialize in the classroom very much, then the playground or lunch is really your only opportunity, and you might already feel isolated.
Yeah.
And then also, if that's the only place that you're allowed to socialize and you don't speak very good English, then the only English you're learning is everyday language, and you're not learning an academic language at all.
Yeah.
You're only learning so little kids on the playground are not sitting around talking about
Math.
so math today we learned about division and subtraction and talking in a academic sense. They're talking about yesterday my soccer game I totally scored 10 goals. They're not, and it's this exaggerated form of English and this all these adjectives and descriptors, and it's not academic language where you could sit down and write an essay with the words you're learning on the playground. You need more formal.
Being able to decipher, what was the tone of that, or
Yeah.
something.
Not learning anything. to apply to an academic sense.
Not to mention
Not
spelling,
anything,
you know, if you're not having
Yeah.
to do that, like, there can be a ton of confusion about any of that. Yeah, like, people still
Yeah.
don't have that.
Yeah.
They are from America and have
Yeah.
tons of education.
When my first quarter, I can't remember if I told you guys this, but my first quarter, my first practicum in the education program, I had to, for my practicum I was down in Burlington and they had Success for All was their reading program. And they have a lot of Spanish speakers there. And one of the things I had to do was, I mean the program was terrible anyway, but one of the things I had to do was they had like a pronunciation test every week. So they had their spelling words or whatever these words were. And you just went around to the kid and asked them to read the words. And if they didn't sound like an English speaking person, then it was wrong. They got it wrong. So like if they had like a little accent or you know, they rolled their R or whatever, then it was technically considered wrong. And I was
Program?
it's a reading program. So it was like their reading curriculum, essentially.
So messed up.
And like the other thing they would do is they had big, huge posters all over the wall with the number of kids that were at grade level. So like 293, like all over the building. It's like, well, and then they had walk to read. So if you were not at grade level, you had to go, you know, you were in a mixed classroom for reading at whatever level you were at. So you for sure knew if you were not at grade level. And then you're not one of those
You just
people
sit there
that's
and
on the
stare
side.
at the number of the group that you're not
That's
in.
so
It was awful. So I was really uncomfortable. Yeah, and I just remember like correct. Like if I could understand the word, like you got it correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's what I would have been doing for
Yeah. And I'm trying to like build relationships with these kids, you know.
Yeah.
So it was really bad. And
Oh my
nearly, I mean, probably 80% of them were Spanish speakers. So I don't think they have that anymore. But it was also David Carroll's first quarter at Western, and he was trying to like help us figure out how this, you know, he's like the head of the department, and he was a little like didn't know how to handle it. Yeah, because we were all fired up. David Carroll, he's like the head of the education, the elementary
I'm
education
like, I do
department.
not know who this
Yeah.
is.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Elementary.
Yeah, so it was a little shocking. And that program still exists. I don't know where they don't have it down there anymore, but it's still out there in the world. Yeah. Definitely
I
not
just
there.
can't help but like laugh at that. Like, do people think this is like you know what I mean? It's like, oh my god, there's no like who thought of this idea.
I know. Well, you know, they think it's gonna raise the achievement gap, and then and it's all about money.
But then what is speaks like an American? Like, what is that? Because you've got, you know, down the south, on the East Coast, like,
Everybody,
But like Western Washington is like a lack of an accent, so it's like if they sound like somebody from Western Washington, it's like the desired.
Oh.
Like
Yeah.
I mean, if you ever listen, so if you go anywhere and you listen to the news, what accent do they have?
Yeah, it sounds
Ours.
like ours. Yeah,
But if you go
that's true.
to anywhere in the country,
Yeah, they don't
what
have,
do
like,
they
a
sound like?
southern
They're not
accent on the
represented
news.
by the people on their news. They're represented by what we sound like, which is weird to think about because we're from here, so it doesn't seem weird to us. But anywhere else, we are the lack of an accent.
that's true.
Yeah, that's weird. I'm from Eastern Washington, and when I first moved here, people thought I was from like the Midwest because I supposedly have an accent. So apparently, the east side of Washington has
An
an accent that I never knew I had. Yeah.
Yeah, this area is like lack of an accent. Because it's just like very plain.
Since when is that good to be playing?
Yeah.
Good job, guys. We're playing today.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the other 25 minutes.
24 and 15 seconds.
Talk about this other one now, maybe, which was
So
So
that second
crazy.
was so interesting.
It was so
Did you guys watch
interesting.
videos?
yeah.
I like kept YouTubing different videos. I was like, oh my god, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to find one. I guess the one she had was pretty good, but there was a few where it wasn't like as sing-songy,
Mm-hmm.
and those ones were really interesting because it was like
Mm-hmm.
you sounds like you're speaking the language.
They're like
But it had like the subtitles.
Yeah.
Like there was a bunch that I found with subtitles,
Oh yeah.
and it's like the letters are like G, X, L.
There's some in
like
here, I
H,
think.
A, I.
Okay, whenever, like,
A, I, O maybe.
Yeah, only like 3 vowels.
And like if you look at like their words, it's really weird because it'll be like G, A, I, X, O, O.
Oh yeah, there's some.
Or like
from
really,
Yeah,
like
like
really
really
weird.
XAOI.
yeah, I saw it, something
Yeah.
where it had some of that writing on it, and the whole time I'm like trying to like figure out if I put them in a certain order,
Yeah,
if it would be
like,
a word, I was
in
like,
range.
you know,
Yeah.
when people like mix up the words, it's like I can figure this out.
It was so weird.
Well, and they said they couldn't even really learn it.
Uh-huh.
It took them forever
Well,
to
I think
learn
that
it.
was especially because the people of the tribe were so opposed to anything outside of their tribe, so they didn't want to learn English, which I feel like would have made it easier.
Oh yeah.
Like if
Mhm.
both wanted to learn each
Mhm.
other's language, you could have had a connection between them.
Mhm.
But there was no they wanted to learn
Yeah.
also, so it was just him like
Trying to like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially like the distinct cultural differences, like talking about like the bug spray, trying to just do
Yeah,
like the
bug-
hand
yeah.
motions. Yeah.
it's like a plane landed on his arm.
Yeah, it was like the way we represent animals is like cultural. That's what Everett said. I thought that was really interesting
Yeah.
to think about.
Because like when we think of
Like
like
when we like do like animal sounds or like yeah.
Well, that's like one of the first things you teach like child.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
all their animal sounds.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Well, and colors.
Mhm.
And they don't have colors.
Like the basics that
or in numbers.
They don't
They
have
don't have like
numbers.
set.
Well, that's like what mine was about, was how in the heck do children learn this language, and it was all just about
Yeah.
through the song.
like
That's what I
repeating.
did, just like
yeah.
literally sitting down and repeating the song over and over and over again, and then eventually we'll understand it.
Well, and that's one thing I've been thinking about with my daughter. It's interesting to read this stuff and think about how I am like what I'm doing as a parent that just comes naturally, but that's like
No, like,
perpetuating my
You're
culture.
little
Yeah.
teaching a little person like to speak English.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you think about that, it's like how do I teach
Crazy.
like
Yeah.
if it was a Spanish speaker coming into this country, I'd be like, how do I teach this person to speak English?
Yeah.
But when it's a baby, I'm like, oh yeah, this is
Right,
this.
just tell them
This
what
is-
everything
yeah.
is. Yeah, so I was thinking about like animal sounds and then the nursery rhymes and all the nursery rhymes that everybody knows no matter how old you are, and how, you know, we've been talking about like loss of language and loss of culture. So there's gotta be the same thing in all sorts of different cultures. It's the songs that these people are singing to their kids, and how if you like it'd be cool to see like what are your little nursery rhymes like in other languages, like in Spanish and some other ones, and how they're the same or different.
Should
And
that be
some
a
of
question?
ours that could be a question. Some of
Okay,
ours
let's
have
type it.
weird histories, like
What
Ring
time
Around
is
the
it?
Rosie.
27 minutes.
Ring Around the Rosies is like about
27,
what
what was it?
27 minutes, 57 seconds.
Okay, I'm just gonna put 50.
Or 50, yeah.
Oh, Callie's right.
Yeah, I have it open in the
Oh,
Thing
okay.
right now.
So the
Perfect.
question should be,
Well, we can
well, we can
Figure out.
what was the question?
about
About like nursery
cultural
rhymes.
nursery rhymes, like different cultures, what their nursery rhymes are.
Well, because like in there, it's like weren't they talking about like that they don't have like stuff in the past because they only like think
the only
in
thing
the
that was
present.
present. Yeah.
So like I was like trying to think like like nursery rhymes with their kids, like do they just like come
They
up
just
with
come up with
something?
it right
Yeah,
now on
like,
the
'cause,
fly.
like,
Yeah.
or do they
Well, I
not
thought that was
have them?
weird that
Like,
the whole like that they don't have art, and that was
Uh-huh.
went along with also not having a deep memory.
Yeah.
Was he was like, well, they just made this airplane. Like, is that not art? And then he was like, well, they only make them like when it's
someone,
here.
yeah, when it's here.
And they don't keep it.
And they don't keep it,
yeah.
So that went along with like they don't really have art, but they also don't have a deep memory because like when it's not there, they don't talk about it, think
Yeah.
about it, remember it, do anything about it.
So then, like, when they have experiences, I guess thinking about that aspect of it, it's like, do you not, they
Like,
don't
there's no
really
history.
remember,
Well,
yeah.
And it's just like, I don't know, whenever I think of the brain, like I think you see something, you're gonna remember,
Remember it,
But
so
then
how do you,
you
yeah.
think about it, like we're taught, like if you see something, that obviously means something, and there's a word for that, which means that you're
Right.
gonna remember it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, their brains have evolved differently. They don't
Yeah.
have a long-term memory.
Memory, which,
Well, I was also thinking of like memories, like like they're like
so
childhood
deep so
memories.
quickly.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
that's just like
Well, my question was about like how is this whole thing, like how is it controversial? And And so I was thinking about how, and some of the people in here were kind of saying that Everett, because he was saying, oh, they don't have all of these things in their language, and especially that whole recursive part was like the biggest part that was missing.
that was
And
so crazy.
yeah, and so then these people were saying, well, by saying that, you're saying that they're not intelligent because they don't have these parts to their language. And I think this group of people is kind of scary for people to think about how they are really, because it blurs the lines between humans and animals.
Yeah.
And
I thought the
we're supposed to be above the animal kingdom, and these people are kind of in the middle.
I thought the one that was really interesting was the part where he was saying something about we're so conditioned to believe that this is not possible, that languages are based on an alphabet and words for like all the words lacking were all, each, most, few, and every. And like our languages are based around quantity and all that kind of stuff. And then they're also based around this term of like the idea of recursion, that you can take two things and put them together and like your language like flows together nicely. So the fact that most linguists are like, no, that's not possible, that languages exist without that. And then he was saying, I'm sure there's a ton of languages in the world that exist without it, but since we've been conditioned to believe that's not possible, we haven't even looked for them. So, or like bothered to learn languages like that. He was saying something, he was saying something about like, there's plenty of languages out there that we don't know about, so we don't know whether they involve this or not, and we've been conditioned to believe that it's impossible until now, and this language doesn't have that. So I'm sure there's other ones out there like that. We just haven't looked at them.
And I think a reason we're so dependent on having that alphabet is because that's the only way we could really learn that language. We could really understand it and have the true knowledge of both our own culture and their culture. And so not having that as something to base everything off of just really freaks us out.
And because they're humans, we think, well, we should be able to figure this out.
And one thing I was like wondering when I read this, because they were saying what is 8 syllables and 3 vowels, or not syllables, consonants, and 3 vowels, was like, did we put that alphabet system on them? Because it's not a written language, is it? Like,
no.
They don't have that. Like, we did that.
We assigned, the sound that our letter makes is probably, we got as close as we could to
Like,
the sound that they make.
Is that what happened, or were they writing symbols in?
Oh, I doubt it.
Well, that's what
because like I don't think that could be another question.
So I was like wondering, like, how is this based on 8 consonants when like I'm listening to this? I'm listening to this and like X does not make that sound.
Right. Yeah, I don't
X
know.
doesn't make that sound, so how did we even assign X?
Well, that's
G,
like
U,
what I wonder about that when they
What
take
time is it?
languages.
32.
When they take languages that don't have a written form and they meet with a linguist and they turn it into a written form. How do you assign letters to it?
I feel like that kind of goes like with this like cultural thing. Like we're just like naturally accustomed. Like everything has like a symbol or a letter.
Yeah.
Like, but it's not in
Not
there.
in
It's
their
like
culture.
it's like different.
Well, and then going back to what I said about like blurring the lines between humans and animals, there's lots of animals that have super complex ways of
Language,
communicating.
Like it might not be a
Dolphins.
Yeah,
and-
dolphins.
Well, even apes. I mean, apes are a huge one.
Yeah. So, and we don't understand any of that. So it's, and we never would be
Even
able
the
to really.
letters on it either, like
Even
Yeah, no.
dogs, if you think about it, like you're like tell the dog to sit and they sit. They don't like
They're not like,
see
okay.
SIT in their brain and know to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, it's really interesting.
yeah, I was just really confused the whole time because they were like, oh, this language, blah 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 blah, and there's 8 consonants and 3 vowels, and I was like, but how? I don't know how. Like, what? Where did you come up with this? And if you were coming up with the letters, why wouldn't you just do our whole alphabet?
Why just like choose?
Why just choose random 8 letters, like
All the cool
11
ones.
letters? Like, what?
Well, because like they have the different like intonation and like that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like, do you assign something to that? Like how that
Yeah, there's so many
changes the
tones and
word?
syllables
Yeah.
and-
Or,
Well,
like,
and in
the
other
length.
tonal languages, they have a lot of symbols. Like Japanese and Chinese, it's a lot of symbols, and so
Yeah.
one symbol represents a whole thing.
Word.
It's not
Yeah.
So that's the other
one
thing.
letter at a
That's the
time.
other thing I was confused about. Is like if there was like, if it wasn't going, they were going to put it in a written language. I guess it's because American people did it. I'm sure, or like English speaking people, but like why wouldn't it be a symbolic language versus an alphabetic language? Because it seems to me like, I mean, they're
Mostly
tribe
what
in the
they're referring to
Amazon.
are like things. Probably.
Yeah. They're not doing deep thinking and going way back in the past thinking about stuff. It's like just words strung together like sentences for current time.
But then also like symbols they'd have to write down, and I feel like they, going along with them not wanting to like think of the past or something that's already happened.
Well, I'm not thinking like
Oh.
the tribe coming up with symbols for their words, but like as
Okay.
linguists,
Yeah.
why did they choose
letters.
it to be
Mhm.
letters rather
Instead
than
of
symbols?
something, yeah.
Because I feel like it might have been, I don't know, because you can't stand out the words from the letters.
No, and like a tree looks like a tree wherever you go.
Yeah.
So it could, yeah, but then that's our interpretation of
Yeah,
tree.
tree.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, I don't know. It was just the whole thing. I was like confused about how they made it a written language.
Because like without like some sort of symbol to describe like the intonation or like the length of even like how you say something, like it could be a totally different word.
Well, and then there was lots of like,
Yeah, it's weird. Like
Well, and I think without
I
a
don't know
knowledge
what
of
it was.
both cultures, you couldn't
There we
really
go.
come up with something.
No. I couldn't believe this was kind of a question I thought about that we could even put down as a muddiest question. That, like, what makes them capable of resisting all of these cultural things, and other cultures have been so influenced and oppressed and feel like they have to change. And they somehow have been able to, like what about them?
and it's not like they were
makes that
just discovered either. They were discovered what in like the 1700s.
Yeah.
Maybe it said.
Yeah.
linguists
Yeah,
like
it's
keep coming.
Yeah.
And, like trying.
And I mean, I'm sure they can't articulate that.
Yeah.
So that's a
Yeah,
question
they're not.
that could never be
They're not
answered,
like
really.
telling these people like we don't
Yeah.
want modern things. Like,
Right. You just don't. It just never happens.
yeah.
You should write that down as a question.
Yeah.
I think it was at 37.
So I was thinking, why can't more
36.
cultures be like that? Like, if more cultures could be
Yeah,
like
I
that.
know.
I mean, diversity.
Yeah.
They can like keep their culture.
Yeah. And then
Traditions and they wouldn't like feel like
Yeah.
But at the same time,
But
you
at
have
the
all
same
these
time,
linguists
yeah.
going, tell me everything so that I can make an interpretation of it.
yeah, and I can put my own ideas of what your culture is like.
Exactly. And then
out there.
teach all these people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and they started out as missionaries, so that was their first
Yeah.
goal anyways.
It was funny how they were like, he's no longer following the
Yeah.
Christian religion.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay. But I thought it was crazy how there was all like other missionaries that were there studying or like doing missionary work and trying to learn the language, and they were there for what, like one was there for 7 years and one was there for like 10 years, and they made no progress in learning the language. Like none.
Can you imagine like spending all that time reading?
Yeah.
Like, so I learned nothing.
Yeah.
It's a big waste of
know.
time.
Well, and it's for missionaries. It's not about learning a language,
Yeah.
so it's a little bit different. But like, and I
But
don't know if
still.
those missionaries were linguists at all.
Right. Yeah.
Like I didn't really catch that in the article. But
Usually they're not.
yeah. So it was just like, how
Mhm.
frustrating would it be to like
I know.
spend your life trying to not?
And you're trying.
to
You
like
think you're
help.
gonna try to make their life
Yeah.
better
Yeah.
somehow.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but you're there like trying to interact with them and like get to know them, and you have absolutely no way of doing that because even the hand symbols that you use, like they were saying, aren't
Right.
Like
Different.
culturally
it
different.
doesn't
Yeah.
translate. They can smile at them, they can smile at
Yeah,
you. Like, I
right.
don't know.
Well, yeah, because they didn't even want to learn how to plant things and grow a garden,
Yeah.
which that's like such a missionary. Like we're gonna go into this impoverished country and teach them how to grow their own food, and that's gonna make their lives better. And,
Yeah.
Like I feel like the thing is like
Stuck
these
to
people
their
don't
own
like see
Mhm.
themselves as
well, they're not starving.
yeah, they're not starving, they're not impoverished.
No.
They're like making it clearly fine.
Yeah.
Like with what they've
Like
done.
obviously they've survived all this time.
Yeah.
Like, they're totally fine. They don't really need help.
Mhm.
It's just more like trying to like take God to them, which
Yeah.
how are you gonna do that when you
Can't.
When
you can't.
They talked about their gene pool a little bit in there, about how they keep their, because they were like, at first, one of them had to rule out, the linguist had to rule out like mental retardation communication as part of why they like
Oh,
had all these
yeah.
things missing from their
Yeah.
language, and then they realized that no, that can't be it because their women go and
Yeah.
you know, sleep with other people from other tribes, so they keep their gene pool fresh
Yeah.
too. So they
So
even
sad.
take care of that
Yeah.
problem, you know.
Like
Yeah.
we thought about it.
I know,
I
I
mean,
know.
do you think
Obviously
like, there was
there
like
was
one
discussion.
generation where it just like happened that there's girls retarded? Like there was like incest and all these kids who have disabilities,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden they're like, so not doing that again.
Yeah.
Like they just like, but then
Well,
they don't
you
have a
think
deep
about-
memory, so it's like how do you
How do you
I know,
remember
the
it?
whole,
Not
the whole
Yeah.
deep memory thing is
I know,
so
it's so-
confusing to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
Well,
I
and then
don't
I was
understand
thinking,
that
well,
at
I guess
all.
that's what Native American tribes must have done. They didn't just have kids within their own tribe because eventually
Yeah.
there would have been too much
Yeah.
breeding. Yeah, they must have had to venture out every once in a
Yeah.
while.
We can take a little trip.
Yeah.
Drive,
Like,
or
road
road
trip.
trip.
I mean,
Yeah.
even nomadic cultures of like way back when, it's like, so I'm sure they just like ran across like another group of nomadic people that like made it and went on their way. Like,
Like, oh, you're a
Yeah.
little short on jeans too? We can help you out.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and there was a lot of that stuff about Chomsky and how Chomsky, you know, believed that there's like a language organ that we're
Oh,
born
that like
with.
is, yeah, and the more language that you have throughout your life,
The more it
developed
grows
you-
and
it grows,
develops.
yeah.
And you hear that a lot with talking about students and their abilities, you know, to be
Yeah.
good readers and writers, and the
Mhm.
more language they're exposed to or the more books they read, how much more that develops their language. So, you know, part of what Chomsky says is correct.
I know,
Like,
it's like, yeah,
I feel like it kind of goes like in school, like the more you like work at it and you know, you're using your brain, you're making it stronger so you can learn more, and it kind of goes along with that.
mhm.
Exposing yourself to more language.
like I've taken Spanish since I was in 6th grade, and I'm taking it now too, and it's just crazy how much, like, it actually does help if you keep taking it, because also, like, I talked to a bunch of teachers and they're like, if you take even 1/4 off of a Spanish class, then you're gonna forget some of this stuff,
Mhm.
so I just thought that was interesting connecting it to that.
Yeah, because you're not using it at all.
Mm-hmm.
But then, as I was saying that, I was thinking, you know, we want them to have all this deep language development even before they enter kindergarten, but that's because we want them to be successful in our school system and our
Yeah.
American culture. And that doesn't necessarily mean that these people who have lower language skills are less intelligent.
Yeah,
Just have a different intelligence.
They just like have a different capacity
different
for
way,
language.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if we were stuck out in the middle
It's
of
not like they're
nowhere,
not communicating.
told to survive, like who could do it?
Yeah.
A lot of people could do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're reading Hatchet right now as a read aloud in class, and the kids are just like, because these are like, you know, some of them are afraid to go on a walk in the woods because of a deer. And so we're reading Hatchet, you know, and the kids like eating raw eggs. And it's like, it's crazy. Yeah. Survived. Yeah. I hadn't read that book in a long time. It's a
I
good
have
one.
not read that one.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there was a girl in my class who was begging me to read it. My favorite book. My favorite book. Okay. Just because it was written in the 80s and you say it's your favorite book, we're gonna read it. Because I'm sure no one's even heard of it, you know.